All right, so we are hitting the 12:30 time frame, at least here, Pacific in San Francisco. Thanks everyone for sharing where you're dialing in from, sending nice warm vibes to all of you on the East Coast with the feet of snow. I'm Morgan Cheney, and I'm our Senior Director of Marketing here at Blueboard, and wanted to officially welcome you to today's webinar. We're so excited to host a wonderful panel-filled conversation all around the power of authentic appreciation. We're going into holiday time, and appreciation and gratitude is obviously really top of mind and is a really good time as well with all of the 2020 planning discussions that you're having internally. So we hope that after today, you'll have a better sense of why appreciation is a really important part of your engagement toolkit. Walk away with some scenarios where you can inject appreciation into your daily routine, but mostly do it in a way that's authentic and impactful for the employees that you're serving. So let's jump in to what we're going to be chatting through today. I'll do a quick welcome and introduction of our panelists in just a minute. From there, we'll talk a little bit about why we're here. So again, why is appreciation an important part of your toolkit? How is it linked to engagement? And then we'll turn it over to our panelists, talking through the 4 pillars that make appreciation truly authentic and valuable and great for driving positive behavior change. We also got a few great questions around myth busting. So how to debunk some perceptions of appreciation, how to make it more powerful. And then at the end, we'll be actually taking your questions that come through during the webinar as part of a live Q&A. A few housekeeping items just to cover off on our end. I want to direct you to a few tools that you'll be seeing in your Zoom toolbar. The first is our chat box that a lot of you are already using, sharing where you're dialing in from. That's going to be your go-to for any quick questions that you might have. Mitchell is on the line from 15.5, and if you have any questions about recording or audio, he'll be happy to chat with you there. Otherwise, for any panel questions, we'd love for you to drive those to the Q&A, which is going to be another box in your Zoom poll. You're welcome to share those. We'll be answering those at the end of the session as we have time. Other housekeeping notes, our lines will be muted. So if you do have any questions, please direct them to the Q&A or to the chat. We'll be trying to get to any of those urgent ones as they come in. Otherwise, we'll be working through those as a group. And we'll also be recording this event. So in any case that you do have to drop off early, we'll be creating an entire blog post with a recording and recap that will be shared out next week. So we'll be sure to get that to you in the case you can't stay the whole time. And for those who are collecting or working through their SHRM recertification, we're happy to offer 1 professional development credit for those who stay on through the webinar. That will be shared at the end of the 60-minute mark, and you're welcome to use that towards your professional development. So without further ado, let's jump in to some speaker intros. All right, we're going to ask a few questions of our speakers to help us get to know them. One, we're going to have them share a little bit about what their company's like, how many employees you're serving, where their employees are located, so we get a sense of remote or distributed teams. And the question we're going to kick off with is, who was the last person you personally appreciated and why? So we'll start with Kevin, actually, just to get us rolling. Welcome, Kevin.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Kevin. I'm the co-founder and COO of Blueboard. Blueboard, we're 85 people across a few different offices. We're located in San Francisco, have an office in San Diego, Salt Lake City, and then our engineering team is in Kharkiv, Ukraine, which is near the border between Ukraine and Russia. And so last time I appreciated somebody, we had one of our salespeople organize an optional work remote trip from Puerto Vallarta, which obviously involves a lot of logistics, rents out an entire workspace, and she did all of that on top of her daily job and organized a bunch of fun activities, including ATVing, scuba diving, and a cooking class for all of us. And so super awesome for her to do that to help build kind of camaraderie and culture with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Welcome. Next up, we have Shane Metcalf. Welcome, Shane.
Okay. Thank you, Morgan. Shane Metcalf. I am the co-founder and chief culture officer of 15.5. And 15.5, we build software that improves culture, engagement, performance, and retention. And so we're in San Francisco, New York City, Raleigh, North Carolina. Also got a team in Ukraine, Poland, Netherlands, all over Europe. We're about 200 people. And part of, some of my credibility, so we're about 200 people. We have a perfect 5-star rating on Glassdoor. In 8 years, we've had only 5 people voluntarily leave the company. So almost zero attrition. And I would say that so much of that is because we've gotten a couple of things right around appreciation. There's more to it, but appreciation is one of the central pillars of how we've built an extraordinary culture.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. Next up, we have Susan Fierro. Welcome, Susan.
Thanks, Morgan. Good to be here. I am in our headquarters, which is in Irvine, California. You can see the sun outside the window. We're actually looking forward to some winter if we get it. We have about 100 employees. We actually are largely remote. About, let's see, over a third of our company is remote, and we're spread across the United States in many different states. And let's see, the question was, when's the last time I recognized someone? So my team and I were heavily driven on food recognition. And so there's a really awesome donut shop that's down the road. And just on Monday, I took one of my team members over to grab some donuts. And that's how I showed her how much I appreciate her.
Thank you so much. Shane, did we get your who have you appreciated recently and why too?
No, I totally forgot to answer it.
No, you're good. Let's go back to you really quick.
I'm going to go with my director of customer success, Ginny Yang. So I shared a panel stage with her the other day talking about mental health in the workplace. And I appreciated her for the presence that she brought, and then also the vulnerability that she brought to the stage and the way that that opened up the room and gave everyone else permission to also be vulnerable. And it was awesome. And she's a total badass. And so I got to share that both in person and in a high five.
Love it. Thank you. All right. And then last but certainly not least, we have Trace Downey joining us all the way from Europe. So thank you so much, Trace, for staying up with us. I'll turn it over to you for your intro.
Yeah. Hey, guys. I am Trace. I work for Jane.com. We are nearing 200 employees right now. We have about 10 people that are remote. Like Morgan said, I'm coming from Edinburgh, Scotland right now. Super glad to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics. I've researched this gratitude in the workplace extensively. And the last person I appreciated was our lead of customer support. Her name's Ashley. She works remotely and her team is remote as well. She goes out of her way. For anybody who works remotely, it can be isolating and lonely sometimes. And Ashley makes sure that like everybody on her team feels valued and appreciated, and really tries to, bring that close-knit feeling to her team. And she probably has one of the closest teams in our company, despite not being in the office every day. And I really, really appreciate her. I think she's a great friend, and yeah, I'm super happy to be a part of her team.
That's awesome. That's so important too, like you said, just to make sure that they have their own unique culture, even when the team's remote. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll wrap this up too. An appreciation moment I had recently, similar to Kevin, was with one of my reports who is one of our newest additions to the team. He's focused on design and marketing, but has really gone above and beyond to help us with an office redesign, which is not really part of his role, but our mission at Blueboard is to help employees to challenge their comfort zones, indulge in their passions, and try something new. So he's definitely been challenging his own culture, or challenging his own comfort zones by really thinking about design in a totally new canvas, and has been leaning into a lot of the new learnings from that and just loving it. So that's been a really cool appreciation moment that I got to have yesterday with him, and really celebrating him leaning into something new and building something that we'll get to use every day and that employees will get to enjoy. Great, thank you guys so much for that intro. So happy to have you on the panel. We're gonna keep moving on with a little bit of that. Why are we here today? Why exactly is appreciation such a critical part of your toolkit? So a few of the more qualitative items that we'll cover at first. As most of us are aware, employees don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. So as an HR leader, how do we cultivate that culture of appreciation and really lean into opportunities to train and encourage and reinforce our managers to be thoughtful and specific and authentic in how they appreciate the teams that they're governing over? Also, at the end of the day, employees want to be seen and valued. Not to generationalize by any means, but this continues to be a very high priority for our younger generational segments, specifically Gen Z and our millennial population, who ultimately want to come to a place where they can not only build meaningful relationships, but also really see their impact and see that their work is valued at the end of the day. So appreciation in a way that's authentic is really critical in identifying those moments where they've gone above and beyond, made a significant contribution, or to show how their work has really created an impact across the company. For those of us who are wanting more of that quantitative piece as well, we leaned into a few stats that are either from Deloitte or from a pretty great infographic and research study produced by work.com. We're sourcing that in the bottom in the case you want to check these out after the webinar. We actually find starting just why it's such an important piece of your engagement strategy is because for most employees, appreciation and those recognition moments are actually missing. We see that 70% of employees actually report that they don't get recognized maybe but once a year, or sometimes not even at all. And the challenge is that that can be really demotivating. It can be kind of disappointing as well if you're an employee and you're working really hard and not feeling like that appreciation is either coming at all or it's delivered in a really ineffective way. But what's crazy is that if you ask companies if they have those programs in place, the same amount will say that they do. So there's oftentimes a lot of opportunities for recognition to be more socialized or to be more accessible or to have more training and awareness for managers to know what programs even exist for them to utilize, and for managers to ultimately feel more comfortable and confident giving appreciation, which is what we're going to be diving into most today. From there, we find that appreciation is a critical part of your employees wanting to stay. So 1 in 2 employees, give or take, will ultimately choose to leave your company when they don't feel appreciated. I'm personally surprised that that number isn't higher. I feel like it's such an important part of people feeling connected and valued at the company, but it is something to consider when you think about your retention plans and strategy. And then lastly, how does it affect performance? We find that nearly 80% of employees say that recognition makes them want to do a better job. They feel more fueled and inspired and feeling like they're part of the team, and therefore their work product only gets better. So if anything, these 3 stats alone will hopefully help fuel your conversations internally. And then the last piece we want to talk about was that bigger picture. So not just the one-to-one value that appreciation moments can have, but also that more qualitative item of the ripple effect. And I actually wanted to have Tree speak up a little bit on that specifically, but an additional thing to consider is that power of the ripple effect as employees feel appreciated and then cascade those positive feelings across the organization. Trace, I know this is something you studied specifically and would love to hear a quick POV on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my favorite thought leaders is Oprah Winfrey. I'm sure we've got some Oprah fans in the audience, but she one of her favorite authors is Gary Zukav, and he talks about how with gratitude, there's a physical cause and a physical effect. Its intention is what causes the effect. So, what that means is if you have loving people in your life, you've been a loving person. If you've had selfish or angry people in your life, look at yourself, because maybe you've had some anger or self-concern. And so I think that if you look at it that way, if you live authentically with gratitude, you're going to see the world in a different place. And I even think it's backed by science. I know, like, a lot of us, are in the fields we are. We're not scientists, we don't study physics, but Newton's third law of motion talks about for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Take for instance, if you're hammering a nail, you can actually feel the vibration from the resistance that comes back in your hands as you're doing that. And I think that if you look at gratitude that way, you can understand that it can transform any situation that you're in. It alters your vibration. It moves your energy from something that could be negative into positive. So, the more you put out into the world, it's going to come back to you. There's spiritual equivalents to that. Some people call it karma. Some people call it the golden rule. But I firmly believe that, instilling gratitude in your workforce will have a positive effect on everybody, and the results will be astounding.
Amazing, Trace. Thank you so much for sharing that. And totally agree that gratitude is also a choice that you make. How you perceive a situation, how you take that breath and take a step back and see more of the positive opportunity as well. And then that attitude and behavior can influence others as well. Great. All right. Thank you so much for that quick overview. We're going to jump now into, great, we know appreciation is important. How exactly do we get to the authentic piece? What are those pillars that make appreciation authentic and therefore more impactful over time? So the 4 characteristics that we're going to dive into are going to be, first, that the appreciation moment is personalized. So whether that's getting to know the employee's preferences via their manager, asking those questions, observing their own needs and desires, and really what's comfortable for the employee, you should make sure that the appreciation moment is delivered in that way. What would be terrifying would be if someone hates kind of that public exposure, and then you have a huge appreciation moment at an all hands and drag them up on stage. They would probably want to shrink into a corner. It's really important to know, similar in the vein of the love languages in the workplace, how does someone like to receive appreciation? How is that going to create a stronger bond between the manager and the employee going through that process together? So making sure that appreciation is personalized. The next characteristic we'll dive into is real time. So not saving that notion of appreciation for their performance reviews 6 months later, but making sure that managers and leaders are taking the moment immediately after something happens that's positive or within that vicinity of making the time to celebrate that person and to have that appreciation conversation with them, not storing it away for another time or place. And the other piece too is similar to what Trey said, that ripple effect. So the sooner you can call out great behavior, the more likely they are to continue to demonstrate that. And that way you're having more of those moments come up in the future. You're setting a good path for them. Next up is specific. So this means that it's intentionally tied to the behavior or action or milestone that the employee achieved. It's not just a passive, thanks so much for doing that. It's really, what was the impact that it had? Why specifically are we calling out this individual behavior or action that you did? How are we kind of marking what's deserving of appreciation or recognition a little bit later on? So that again, employee can hone in on the behaviors that are desired and continue to repeat those in the future. And then lastly, growth oriented. So we actually were talking about this yesterday as a group, and Shane, I'd love to invite you in to share your perspective on this too in just a second. But when I was thinking about growth oriented, I've been reading Radical Candor lately by Kim Scott, and she talks a lot about how every opportunity to give feedback or appreciation is another opportunity to continue to inspire someone to work further next time. So it was so great that you did this, and why it was relevant, and let's continue to do X, Y, Z going forward, or maybe we could even do this slightly differently. So continuing to bring it back to a feedback conversation is what my perspective was for growth oriented. But Shane, would love to have you speak quickly to, I think it's Carol Dwalt's research that you were referencing yesterday as well.
Oh, all right, now I'm unmuted.
There you go.
When I saw growth oriented, I was wondering if Morgan was meaning it more growth mindset oriented.
Yes.
And I think it's a really interesting distinction because, if you read Carol Dweck's research in the book Mindset, you understand that not all appreciation is actually going to encourage a growth mindset where somebody understands that, it's through effort that we can succeed. It's through effort that we can actually change our intelligence and our skills and abilities. And she talks a lot about, like, with children, where, if we constantly are appreciating them by saying, you're so smart, you're such a rock star, you're so amazing, what that can do is actually reinforce a fixed mindset, because it's like, okay, well, I'm smart, but that means I can never not be smart. I have to do everything I can to preserve looking smart in these people's eyes. And that actually cements a fixed mindset. And so the same thing will happen in work, where if we're only just like, oh, you're such a rock star, you're such a badass, you're such a genius, that is actually going to then reinforce people trying to only do those things that they're getting that recognition for and avoid looking bad. And we want people to decrease the fear of looking bad, so we can actually get to the authentic piece of all of this. And so it's really, she recommends, it comes down to recognizing effort rather than like inherent innate characteristics. And I think it's really a good element to be bringing in, because yes, most of us are appreciation deficient, and it's going to be good to just get appreciation flowing. And some forms of appreciation are superior to other forms.
Got it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I like the notion of the growth oriented versus growth mindset. And to your point, it might not always be the end finish line that you got to, but the effort along the way that you want to celebrate and continue to reinforce. So thank you so much. All right, we're actually going to jump into some questions in just a second. I wanted to thank everybody who's on the line. We had almost actually over 1,500 people register for this webinar, which was amazing, and over 100 questions submitted during the registration process for the panelists. So you might see your name appear on screen over the next few slides. To help fuel the conversation around these 4 tenets, we've paired some of the questions that you asked during registration to get more dialogue out of the panelists. So we're going to jump into our first one. And just a reminder, if you have additional questions along the way, you can add them to the Q&A portal that you'll see listed in your toolkit here. So our first question actually comes from Katie, and it ties back to the personal tenet. So how do you navigate appreciating others in a way that they are actually comfortable with? And I wanted to pass this over to Susan to start, who was sharing some great advice yesterday. So Susan, feel free to lead us off here.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that it can be a little bit intimidating, as Morgan mentioned, like doing something that might actually make the person feel really uncomfortable. So the best thing I would suggest, and what we did, was we actually just asked. We asked our employees, and we actually use 15.5. So we just put a question in the weekly 15.5 that said, how do you best like to be appreciated? And through those answers, we're actually able to create some programmatic things that we could do. So instead of just saying, oh, everybody gets a gift card when they do something well, maybe that's not important to someone. And maybe they just want to have like a few extra hours off, or they like a handwritten note, or they want to, not be mentioned at all. It doesn't matter to them. I mean, there's a host of different things that people can feel around appreciation. So I would say just ask, don't assume, and try to make it as personal as possible, because that's really where it's going to make the impact, is when the person feels like this isn't just a canned thing, like everyone gets the one thing when they do something well, that it's actually really customized to their unique the personality of them.
Awesome. And can you share the question language that you're using, if you remember it off the top of your head?
Yes. So to the best of my recollection, it was, what is the best way that you like to be appreciated? And then we in parens kind of said like a couple different examples, like public shout out, handwritten note, gift card. So like kind of to start the thought process of people, because some people are like, wait, I don't know, like, how do I like to be appreciated? So to get the blood flowing, we also ask a follow-up question quarterly, I believe it is, I can't forget the frequency, but it is, have you been appreciated lately for your hard work? Because the problem is, we expect, especially, from the HR perspective, we can only do so much, right? We're a small team and we can't hold every manager's hand. So we need to have those checks and balances to make sure that the managers are doing their part to appreciate their team members. So we have that question there as a reminder, like, and the manager reviews the report and goes, oh shoot, like this person said no, maybe I should be better about that. Or they said, yes, that's wonderful. And my team and I look at those to make sure that, we don't have to go and maybe smack some, some hands and remind people of what they should be doing. But yes, that's how we're also staying on top of making sure that folks are actually doing what they're supposed to be from the manager perspective.
Wonderful, thank you.
Susan, good to know that you're still using corporal punishment.
Shh, don't tell.
Awesome. Did anyone else want to add to this first question? Feel
I
free to
love
jump
a
in.
comment from Tammy in the audience about talking about the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. We had one of our employees present and do a lunch and learn on that. And I think it's a great way to, you like to kind of in line with this, you like to receive love, appreciation, gratitude in the way that you give it. And so always good to be cued in on that.
That's awesome. Yeah, we actually did a webinar about that as well. If anyone's curious to dive more into that with Dr. Paul White, we have a recording on our blog that you can check out. But It was really interesting to see how they ranked. Verbal, I believe, is still the most popular way of receiving appreciation. Gifts are up there, quality time, of course, but it's a really cool exercise to go through with your team just to understand how people do like to do that. And Susan, I love that you give some of those prompts so people can wrap their head around it and make it a little bit more consistent for managers to react to as
Morgan,
well.
I'll just underline that it really is so important to understand that we do like different types of appreciation. Not everybody's the same. And starting with that awareness is going to get so much farther than if you take a cookie cutter approach to employee recognition and appreciation. And it's really it's a simple idea, and yet it's kind of radical and revolutionary as well. And it also requires you to stretch outside of your own world, actually, to not be cool, I'm just going to project my preferences onto everybody in my company. But I actually have to put in a little bit of the effort. I have to ask, I have to get curious about other people. And that's where a truly authentic program is going to arise.
Yeah, and just in your experience too, are you finding any hesitation from managers that you're overseeing and giving appreciation? Is that almost like step one, getting comfortable as a manager to appreciate people? Or is it more about the mechanics of how we go through that process?
Is that for me?
Just for anyone. I'm just curious if you guys are running into that in your own companies.
Well, I think you have, the issue of the right manager. You may have some that are really great at it because, maybe they've been trained, or they are innately really good at it because they enjoy getting appreciation. But, you do have some folks that maybe have risen into a management role that don't have the I guess the maybe traditional background behind it. So it's not natural to them. Like, it's definitely something that needs to be encouraged. And so there is, I think, that hurdle for some folks to overcome, because it can be awkward, if, especially speaking to what we've been talking about, if the way that that person likes to be appreciated isn't the way that they like to be appreciated. So it's going to take them outside their comfort zone and force them to maybe do something that they wouldn't normally do.
Absolutely. All right, great. Our next question comes from Heather at Smith. This is moving into more real time, and she had a great question about remote workforce, which it sounds like basically everybody on the line has experience in that. So Heather asked, for a largely remote workforce, what are the most effective ways to show appreciation? Susan, we're going to start with you again, since so much of your workforce is remote. Would love to hear your thoughts here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that it is certainly hard when you have folks that aren't in the office and you want to do something real time. You obviously can't go walk over there and do it face to face. So we actually have a Slack channel. So if you have Slack, or if you have any other type of, the way that you communicate, Teams or whatever it is, having a dedicated channel, we actually, again, our 15.5 customers, so our high five feed is integrated into a Slack channel. So folks can actually see that they're constantly in Slack doing other things. They can see that high fives are being given. They can respond to them. So our remote team members, that's really where we try to put those recognition moments in the real time, phase, because then they can get whatever, emojis. People get really creative with GIFs and things, and then it can just be something that we can all celebrate, and then they feel connected in that way. So use the technology that you have, or find technology that may be available to get your remote teams connected and feeling appreciated. And obviously, work through those hurdles, because it's the reality, they're there. So in the real time, doing something that, using technology, I think would be the best way.
I'll add that, so I totally agree, Susan, that having some kind of a prompt to encourage people to reflect and give appreciation is really critical, because typically human beings will gravitate away from this kind of behavior if it's not already a habit. And so you need something that is going to reinforce the habit and remind people and encourage them, just give them a little bit of nudge to give appreciation. And, like in my experience, I'll notice, like when I write my 15.5 each week, and I'll be like, oh, okay, crap, I've got to give some high fives. And then I'll the first one or two will be a little bit of a struggle. And then I get into this flow. And I'm like, oh my God, and then that person in that meeting, I want to appreciate. And all of a sudden, you kind of open up the channel of appreciation, and it becomes so much easier. But it's about taking, going against the grain for those first couple of moments to go against the tendency towards not actually expressing our appreciation. And then another really easy tip is into some of your meetings with a round of appreciation and recognition. So if you have a Zoom call, you know, you're having a distributed team having a virtual call, take 5 minutes and do a quick round of appreciations at the end of the meeting. It's magical. It always works. It always lightens people up and has people feel directly and immediately appreciated for how they showed up in that meeting.
I love that. We did a similar, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Trace,
I would just like to add, jumping back to what Susan said earlier, some people like those handwritten notes. And one of the things I've learned that remote employees appreciate the most is a handwritten note. They don't often, you know, get anything out of the office other than a quick message on the computer. So if they ever open up their mailbox and they find a handwritten note, that goes a long way as well. So don't like forget about writing those handwritten notes to your remote workforce as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of ties back to like, how do people like to be appreciated? Is it the publicly, is it one-to-one, or is it someone really appreciating the time it took to write that note and have it be delivered to you, and then keeping it on your desk or maybe in your archives to reflect on? Yeah. I was going to share, and Kevin, feel free to jump into just some of the ways that we're thinking about remote appreciation at our company. We have a few different ways that we handle it, and one that I really like to speak to. When we think about Blueboard and what we do as a company, we are all about experiences as a reward. So helping companies to empower their employees through recognition to go and do things that have been on their bucket list, or one of those like once in a lifetime opportunities as well, like maybe hot air ballooning, or taking much needed quality time with the family, or going to tour Iceland, for example. So our team that handles all of their experience bookings is our concierge team, and they have quite a stressful job sometimes, right? When you're thinking about travel itinerary, that can sometimes be international and a lot of requests along the way. So on Slack, we've created a section called Love Letters, which is a really comfortable place for them to celebrate their own wins and have this ability to share amazing feedback and photos, and be in a place where it's safe to be like, I did something really great. Like, I wanted to share how cool this job has been for me today, and a really special story that we shared with the recipient. And then immediately after that, there's a lot of piling on of emojis and celebrations and appreciation for that person. But I do like that we've created a home where people can initiate, I did something cool today and just wanted to share. We also have a channel in the same vein of how you live our mission through a channel called Blueboarding. So employees can initiate some things they're excited to share and then bring in appreciation that way, beyond just having it be driven by leadership or by management towards the group.
Yeah, and just to add to that is, to get to Shane's point, I think appreciation is a really good habit, right? But it's a habit that like often needs to be built, because we're always looking to what's next. It's just kind of like how we're wired. And you know, what I love to do is just like model it, right? And that if you appreciate somebody one-to-one, if they're remote, I'll give them a call. I'll send them, if I'm following them on Instagram, I'll send them an Instagram story. Just depends, right? And that kind of modeling goes, and you kind of see that ripple through the organization. So as a leader and as a manager, that's really important.
Great, thank you guys.
Yeah, Morgan, I want to speak to one other thing, and it maybe it'll come up later, but you know, we're talking largely about appreciation coming from individuals to individuals, and that's really an important piece of it. But I also want to speak to that we also need to think about designing a culture of appreciation and gratitude, where it's a cultural norm and it's okay to actually express appreciation, because we all know there's plenty of cultures where it's not the norm. And so if you do it, you're looking like the weird one, and suddenly your belonging in the organization is threatened if you aren't kind of cynical and mean to people. And so we want to think about cultural engineering at the highest level. How do we create a global experience of gratitude and appreciation? And you know, so I think that's like the love notes story, love notes example that you just shared.
Love letters,
Love letters is a great example, because it's setting the tone and giving people that like, hey, this is part of our culture. Yeah. Every Monday morning, we have an all hands meeting for 30 minutes. We spend the first 5 minutes doing a gratitude meditation. you know, we have a gratitude Slack channel. And so there's just already all of these kind of global habits, group habits that are designed to put people into a grateful state of mind. And then that makes it so much easier to know that as an individual, I can express appreciation, and that's in alignment with the company's highest values.
I love that.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah, go for it.
So similarly, we have something that it's the prompting. It's actually like, oh wait, what am I grateful for? And I think we actually rolled out a question in our 15.5, and the question is, oh, let's see, what are you grateful for this week? You know, like, i.e., what brought you joy or happiness? And just prompting that question and having people initially were like, I don't know, like what was it? But the more that's been there, it's like, oh, you know, like seeing my kid's soccer game or being able to do this or whatever the thing was, like now this gratitude is top of mind, and it's first thing Monday morning. So, which can be hard for people. So that's a question that I think has really helped with just the forethought of what is gratitude and what am I thankful for. And it's really been helpful to get that culture, like Shane talked about, of gratitude in the organization.
And, you know, like, just in case people are like, oh, there's a bunch of like soft hippie crap, you know, when we move into a positive brain state, when we're contemplating gratitude, it's actually shown now that the learning centers of the brain light up. So we're able to process information more efficiently. We're able to problem solve. We're able to come up with more creative solutions when we're in a positive brain state. And so using this kind of, like, you know, prompting people, what are you grateful for, is a really powerful way of engineering positive brain states for everyone in the company.
Love it. Thank you so much, Shane. All right, next question, still kind of in the real-time vein. So I love this question from Risha, who said, how do you hold management accountable when it comes to making sure that employees are valued and receive recognition? So this speaks a lot to the culture piece, Shane. I know Trace had some ideas to share here as well about reinforcing and keeping it top of mind. So we can speak to anything additionally here on this question, but that was a perfect segue from where we left off.
All right, Trace, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would say that the best managers don't have to. You don't have to do that. One of the best managers I've ever had, he was actually the CEO of our company, and he passed away in March. And we felt that loss strongly as soon as he left. And so as we've rebuilt our culture and our organization over the year, people just get busy. And so I think it's important for us as HR leaders and people ops leaders to not like discredit people, but kind of just encourage other people to be more appreciative, you know, to be that example. And sometimes it comes down to me sending out a Slack message to some of our managers saying, hey, these people did X, Y, and Z. Can you, you know, show some public appreciation for this, you know? And they've been really appreciative of that. And I think that, you know, if your managers aren't doing that, you might want to appreciate them more, you know, be that example for them, because maybe they just don't know how to do it, you know? And sometimes that's all it takes, is just a nudge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. That, like, yeah, we aren't taught these things in school. We aren't taught some of the basic principles of the positivity ratio, and that, you know, human relationships thrive when you have more positive emotional interactions to negative interactions. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to ensure that, A, it's explicit that this is the kind of culture we want. We want you appreciating your people. Here's some ways you can do it. Here's what that looks like. Think about, you know, when you've been appreciated and how the impact that has had on you. So take it out of an expectation that this should be happening into an agreement with your people, and then provide training and some tools. You know, like, it's also, you want some ways of measuring if it's happening, whether that's through engagement surveys where you're asking people, have you been appreciated in the last year, or rather the last quarter, the last month? So you can get some information and then use that information to start having dialogue. Ask your managers, you know, how are you making sure that your people feel recognized? What are you doing as a manager to learn about your employees' individual methods and individual love languages? Are you feeling appreciated by your manager?
Mhm.
And so again, it's so much of this is so simple, which is comes down to just asking questions and talking about it, having the right conversation. Because sometimes, you know, like if you have certain needs that are not being met, you know, like if you aren't doing work that you actually like doing, if your boss is not equipping you, setting you up for success, but they're appreciating you, it doesn't really matter. You're like, don't tell me that I did a great job on this thing because I have much bigger fish to fry and bigger problems that are not being addressed. So it really, appreciation needs to live within a holistic, kind of suite of kind of next generation performance management.
Mhm.
I think to add to, and like maybe I'll kind of take this a little more specifically is how do you get the leadership team, like the C-level team, to really kind of buy into this, right? If you don't think they are. And I think that can be like a very like intimidating conversation for people. And so like I think, you know, when you know people like at Morgan and some of my team have given me upward feedback, it's always been very thoughtful, right? And they always assume positive intent. Is like, hey, like I know you're really focused on this, but the team feels that, you know, we're not calling out the day-to-day achievements. And for them, it's really important that they hear that, see and hear that, because they want to know that they're doing a good job and they're continuing to motivate it to perform, right? And so I think assuming positive intent of your leadership team and calling out that, hey, like this might be just like an overlook, but it's really important, is like a really honest and direct conversation to have. And I just think being thoughtful with that when you're giving that is super important. Just to, if anybody had that question as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kev. Jumping into our next question, we're going to start to address specific appreciation. So a question from Lindsay. Do people want to be recognized more so for being innovative or for being compliant with reaching expected goals? This question was really interesting and it kind of created some provocative discussion yesterday during our dry run. So wanted to have Shane actually lead us off on this one to start.
Yeah, so I think this is a false choice. I think it's saying that all people like want the same thing and that we all have the same needs, because we don't. And again, it goes back to this basic idea that all you need to do is ask them. Get curious. Hey, do you like being recognized for being innovative or being compliant? You know, I mean, I don't know how, I certainly don't want to be recognized for being compliant, you know, but some people do. And so again, treat people as individuals, not as just sheep that were stamped out that have all the same needs. You know, we all may have a need for belonging and appreciation, you know, in Maslow's hierarchy, but the way that shows up is going to be very unique to us. And so see people as the individuals they are and don't make generalizations. Also, don't use that as as an excuse to withhold appreciation, because in general, I think we're just appreciation deficient. And so if you overthink it, and then you're just becoming analysis paralysis, and then you just don't actually express your appreciation. And so, you know, bottom line is like, just start, you know, experimenting, and you're going to learn a lot along the way, but also get curious. And that solves so many of these issues.
All right, anyone want to add to that? No, we will keep rolling. All right, thank you so much, Shane. I think that's really important to point out too. If we start from the order of these different characteristics, personalization is first and foremost, right? So having those questions, being aware of what that individual needs, and then the rest will flow from there, for sure. All right, moving into growth-oriented / growth mindset, depending on how we're running with it. This question comes from Catherine: how to deliver appreciation along with constructive feedback? So this is a really great question to kick us off, and actually wanted to invite Kevin to start us here.
Yeah, and so when I first read this, it reminded me of the feedback sandwich, which is not a great thing, right? And you know, you start off with what you're good at, and then you slide in the piece of negative or constructive feedback, and then you end with something good, right? You know, I think generally, as a rule of thumb, it's really difficult for people to the shit sandwich. I love that. It's really difficult for people to hear appreciation when they hear constructive, also when they hear constructive feedback. And it is like a cognitive bias we have called loss aversion, or like kind of negativity aversion, is where we really gravitate towards what's negative and not losing something, right? And so it is really hard to structure appreciation. That being said, you know, one of the things that that I try to do, I kind of structure this just as a feedback conversation in general. And I learned this from this guy Carter, who was the former CEO of Walmart. And so after kind of a meeting, a presentation, etc., I sit down with the person and be like, hey, what do you think went well? What do you think you did well in this meeting, right? And they kind of rehash the meeting and, hey, I was well prepared. I thought I asked great questions. And then I will, you know, kind of add my own perspective. Is like, yeah, I think you did really that well. And I also loved this. Like, keep doing that. That was amazing, right? And then the second piece, kind of pause. Second piece is like, hey, what do you think you could have improved on in that? And then I let them kind of hash it out and reflect on themselves. They say something and I'm like, hey, you know, you were right on. I think you could have directed, you know, answered this question better, or I think you didn't really understand this, right? And so being able to kind of, and that's what I do kind of after every meeting and every presentation. And I think it's a good structure to kind of lay out, but I do think in general, it's hard to deliver both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I think just from the practical standpoint, obviously, since many of us on the call are probably HR folks, are people leaders, that you don't want to, you know, falsely lead someone to thinking, like, you know, like Kevin was saying, like they're going to gravitate towards like that positive, and they're going to forget that you actually gave them in that same breath something that they need to work on. So, you know, really just to be careful about the timing of those things and be thoughtful about how you deliver the message, because it could have some unintended consequences if, you know, you're going to end up putting that person on some sort of corrective action, and they're going to go like, well, what do you mean? Like, you just told me that I was amazing and you just appreciated me for all this wonderful stuff. So just be thoughtful about, you know, the timing and the way that you deliver that, because it could get you into some funky kind of uncomfortable situations. People hear what they want to hear.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, what we want to do is we want to get our people into feedback seeking behaviors, because just receiving feedback from nowhere is actually like neurologically the same of like running across a tiger in the woods. And you're like, you know, and we're like, okay, yeah, well, I guess I'll receive your feedback. But the brain actually goes into fight or flight. And so if you can get people coming like Kevin after, you know, talks you give, of like going and actually asking people, hey, what do you think I did well at? And what do you think I could have done better? That's a very different conversation, neurologically speaking, than if you just spring feedback on people. And the other piece of this is, make sure you're not only giving positive appreciation as like an excuse to then deliver constructive criticism. You know, make sure that there's times that you're just recognizing people for what is going well, and it's not always the shit sandwich.
Awesome, thank you guys. We're gonna move into our last question around how to make authentic appreciation authentic. Still growth oriented. This question came in from Len. This one's really interesting too. We were excited to talk through it. How to appreciate a team member that outperforms, however, exhibits some bad behavior. Maybe they hit their numbers, but they're not really displaying the company values or culture as you would hope them to be. Would love to have, actually, I think Susan, you were gonna start us off here.
I'm actually just thinking about the conversation we had yesterday with Kevin, and I really love that, you know, his stance on it. And I think that it really, obviously, depending on the culture of your organization, that's either something that you tolerate, or that's something that, you know, you can't, like, it doesn't the good doesn't outweigh the bad. there. You know, you have to be able to be okay with being off sides and saying, you know, I'm not going to appreciate that person because they've been exhibiting this bad behavior. So even if they're meeting their numbers, like that doesn't equal a whole. Like those two parts don't equal a whole. So I think that, you know, just coming from whichever type of culture that you are, if that's okay, if the behavior is, that type of behavior is tolerated or maybe even promoted, that's just how we do things. Maybe it's okay to appreciate that person for hitting their numbers or for performing or outperforming. But I just think that it really depends on the culture that you have, and being okay with actually not appreciating that person for doing something well if they aren't upholding the rest of the company values, or if they are making other people uncomfortable, or if they're just kind of a trouble person. Like, I think that it's okay to not do that.
Yeah, I think that
Not the 1980s anymore.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think for a lot of progressive companies and cultures, like how you accomplish something is as or even more important than what you accomplish, right? And I think when you recognize somebody who exhibits bad behaviors along the way, it only promotes and encourages that, right? And my take on that is that bad behavior is bad. It's negative to the company, right? Whether that's short term or long term, and it's going to come back to bite you, right? And so for me, this is almost like a performance conversation, right? Where it's not the output, but it's how you get there. And so I think there's a difference between appreciation and acknowledgement. You acknowledge that the person is performing at a high level from an output perspective, but that the way they're getting there is causing a lot of collateral damage to the culture, to the teammates around them, to the customers they bring on, et cetera, whoever the other stakeholders are. And that in the long run is going to have a negative impact on the business and the team and the company. And so I think it's important. And this can be difficult, right? Because on the far extreme is if you have a salesperson bringing in so much revenue for the company, right? But doing it in a horrible way, like how do you have that? And it's not as black and white. But I do think like the acknowledgement that they are performing, but that they need to do it in a better way is going to even take them to the next level, right? Yeah.
Awesome. We have about 10 more minutes left together. I cannot believe we've blown through this so quickly. Two questions that we wanted to cover just as we're wrapping up are really all about myth busting. So what are some expectations or preconceived notions about appreciation that we really wanted to talk through as a group? Our first question, it comes from Victoria with Vision Wheel. She wants us to debunk the mentality that if you do an event, you can check a box and call that employee appreciation. And I know, Trace, you had some thoughts here specifically to what you've experienced in your own company.
Yeah, I think that if you're giving appreciation based on things that people are, it's a natural duty of their job. It's what they're supposed to be doing. You run the risk of actually like creating some sort of precedent for them to expect that every time they do exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So I think it comes back down to finding specific things that they've done to go out of their way and add to the culture. I just don't. I struggle with seeing managers give feedback for so and so has showed up on time every day. I'm like, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing, I guess. But don't reward people for what they're supposed to be doing. Gratitude's supposed to be the above and beyond, and it's more meaningful when it's thought out and specific to what exactly are you trying to encourage that employee to continue doing. Yeah, anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that really quickly too. I think the team event or the team building situation is really what we're dialing in on here. When you have moments where there's maybe a team accomplishment, even with the holidays coming up, where a lot of us are thinking about holiday celebrations and parties, right? But even in a small group setting, it's still really important to keep the personalized and the specific top of mind. So while it was a group, maybe group venture to hit a product launch ahead of schedule or something like that, taking the time to really identify and call out what individuals personally contributed so that they still see seen and valued. So for example, so-and-so who was our product manager did a great job of like keeping everything organized. And then you over here did a great job of innovating within the code to make sure that we could deliver this thing that we didn't think was possible. So taking that time to still lift up individuals, even in a group setting, I think is really important, so that, to your point, Trace, those that are maybe not carrying the weight don't feel like they have permission to not participate or not lean in, because they're going to get recognized anyway as a group.
And, you know, Trace, I do disagree a little bit though, because like, you know, the like, oh, don't recognize people for just doing their job. I think that we should recognize people when we feel authentic gratitude. Like, you know, it's my assistant's job to handle my schedule and to book my flights and hotels and everything. But dang, I feel so grateful for her all the time. And I try to let her know that. I'm like, thank you for kicking so much ass at your job and making my life so much better. You've made all the difference in my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And she's just doing her job. But like, when I feel that authentic appreciation, I think that's when it's so important to express it, because we want it to be, you know, again, like fewer rules are better, I think, when it comes to appreciation. So yeah, I just challenge the idea that we shouldn't thank people for doing their jobs.
I actually read this in a different way. In the doing an event, like a lot of companies will have President's Club, you know, kickoffs and, you know, end of year, like employee appreciation events. And then that alone isn't checking the box that you're doing employee appreciation. Another way to look at it, and I think, you know, one of the things we said is like employee appreciation is a habit. It is a culture that you should build. And it's, you know, you check the box on attributes, right? And employee appreciation is not an attribute. And so it's something that you continually invest in. You continually kind of put an effort into building this habit. It's never done, right? Hopefully, right? Hopefully not. So yeah.
Another metaphor I was thinking is it's kind of like a parent that just tries to buy their kids with like money. You know, it's like the absent father who isn't really actively loving their kids, and just tries to be like, well, I'm just going to buy you stuff. I'm going to pay for these things and send you here and there. But the love is what's missing. And the same thing with an event. Events are fine. Events are wonderful. But if you don't actually love your people, you're not actively loving your employees, they're going to feel it. Like, all of what we're really talking about here is more about the intangible, invisible side of recognition and gratitude, because you can have all the external facets, you can even say the right words, but if there's not the essence behind it of true appreciation, it's going to fall short. It's not going to actually get through to the heart of people. And that's what we're really talking about, is like, for the first time ever, we're bringing our hearts into business. We're bringing our love, we're bringing our whole selves. The intelligence of the heart, emotional intelligence, is suddenly becoming a business advantage. And it's so cool. It's the best news ever.
Just as we're getting close on time, I want to do this. So we're going to save and come back to Lucille's question. I want to give a quick moment to shout out to our sponsors. I can't believe we're almost at the 1:30. Wow. We're going to come back to this notion of entitlement. I wanted to quickly do an introduction of our host. And for anyone who's on the line, invite you to participate in the poll on screen, which gives a little bit of an opportunity for you to connect with our team after the event if you'd like to continue conversations around performance management or experiential rewards and recognition. Feel free to take that poll on screen. So just a reminder, we're Blueboard and we're all about experiential recognition. So whether that's hot air ballooning, family vacations, for anniversaries, referral incentives, and more, really anytime you're giving cash or gift cards, we give employees the opportunity to take a personalized, memorable, and shareable experience as their token of appreciation and recognition from your company. And then Shane, do you want to give a quick overview of 15.5 as well? You
Yeah,
have this
sure.
on
So,
screen.
we build software that helps improve culture, performance, engagement, and retention. And, we really leverage the best science to mimic what the best managers in the world are already doing and create automated process for that. I saw one of the questions come in around how do you prompt people to give and receive recognition and appreciation? We have a feature called High Fives, where when you're writing your 15.5, it's just ask you who did amazing work, who made a difference to your week. And that's the kind of prompt. That's what Susan was talking about of the automation for some of this recognition that they're doing with eVision. So it's so cool to hear that, Susan. So that's really what we're focused on. We believe that companies have an opportunity to help their people be and become their best selves. And that's really why, that's our mission, is to help companies help their people.
Absolutely. And we're going to just leave this on screen. This is our SHRM PDC code. Feel free to jot this down. It's 19J6QJF. We'll leave that on screen. And then as we have another minute or two with our panelists, we're happy to revisit the question that came before in the myth busting section, which is this notion of, does appreciation at any point lend itself to entitlement, or how do you again keep that authentic appreciation flowing and something that's going to continue to fuel people to do better? So would love any perspective on that. I think Shane, maybe you had some ideas you wanted to share first.
Yeah, sure. I think it's false that appreciation leads to entitlement. I think entitlement comes from other things, but it's actually, I think, probably from a lack of authentic appreciation, because then they're like, well, I don't really feel appreciated, so I'm going to game the system any way that I can. And entitlement's a really big problem, and it's incredibly distasteful. I feel like we should have a webinar on how to avoid a culture of entitlement. I want to attend that one.
Yes. Part 2 to this one today. Absolutely.
So Morgan, I'm not sure, how if this is even possible, but I have a list about like 50 or so suggestions that I have actually shared with my management team of just like prompts of things that they could do if they don't know, or if their employee isn't sure of how they want to be appreciated. So I send that over to you. If maybe we could send that out to the participants, that'd be great. Just ideas, because I mean, even something as simple as just being invested and curious about what that person is wants to do for their career development. I mean, that is showing them that you appreciate them because you want to help them grow continually.
Yep.
So, I mean, having those conversations when you're meeting with your teams one-on-one, or your individual, people one-on-one. And I think going back to the personalization, that really makes the difference.
Yeah, totally. I think if you lead with that care, then when you have those appreciation moments, it feels more natural too, right? Because if you're already warm and open and focused and available to those conversations, and you are meeting regularly to talk about their needs, when that appreciation moment comes to play, it doesn't feel like a really sharp turn from maybe what's otherwise a very transactional relationship. I think that's a really important point, Susan. I would love to get those questions, and we would absolutely be able to include those even in the recap and recording, just for future reference for everybody. That would be great. All right, we're a little bit beyond. Did anyone else want to comment on the last question? Otherwise, we'll wrap up today.
I just want to do a blog post, Susan, on those
Yeah.
questions, those prompts.
Yeah, 100%. We had a few questions that came in from the Q&A, and we did not end up having time to answer them. So we'll look through those and potentially have the panelists reach out to you directly. Thank you for all of your engagement throughout. Thank you to Shane, Kevin, Trace, and Susan for joining us today. Stay in touch with 15.5 and Blueboard on our respective websites for more webinars to come. We're getting our December one planned out as we speak, so there'll be more conversations, especially about remote workforce on our end, coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.